Okay, hello. Hi guys. I am back with another video. I'm coming back after a couple of weeks, and I'm sorry for the delay in uploading the next video. I was busy with some personal work. However, I'm back with this one. Although again, I'll have a very busy weekend from tomorrow, so I am uploading this short video. I'm sorry for the background and everything because I'm trying to, at least not miss more than a week if I'm busy with my work or something. So that is why I thought that at least let me put this video out. And if you have any doubts regarding thalassemias, I'm more than happy to take them up on Messenger, on Facebook. You can message me and I'll try and sort it out. And also, some of you have asked me for HPLC videos. I assure you that I'm going to put up a video where I'll just discuss a few cases of HPLC interpretation, few simple cases, not very complex ones. I'm going to do that. But for today, I'm just going to be taking the basics and the overlaps in beta thalassemia. And maybe probably the next one or after that, I'm going to be discussing the HPLC patterns before I finish with hemolytic anemia and move on to the next part, which is the bone marrow failures. So before wasting too much, without wasting too much time, let me start with beta thalassemia. So, for PGs, the important questions that can come from this topic are the types of beta thalassemia. Most importantly, they'll ask you the molecular classification of beta thalassemia. And as far as your practical question answer sessions go, the pathophysiology of beta thalassemia you have to remember, because a lot of questions that are going to be asked are going to be asked on pathophysiology. Even when you try and interpret HPLC, what particular component of the hemoglobin chain increases and finally leading to what hemoglobin rise? If it is alpha chain, if it is increasing, then when will A2 increase, when will F increase? That is what you interpret in HPLC also. So that point you have to keep in mind by keeping in mind the entire pathophysiology of beta thalassemia. And next clinically question that they're going to ask you when, especially in Viva or even in theory, it can come as a short question, is the comorbidities that you are going to see when you are seeing a case of beta thalassemia. So, in the pathophysiology, you have to remember that there will be free chain, alpha chain accumulation. And I'm going to show you the pathophysiology chart, but then you have to remember this, that accumulation leads to extravascular hemolysis. There will be extramedullary hematopoiesis, which will lead to changes in the skull bone, the hand bones. I'm going to show you the images right now. And of course, there will be an iron overload because you will constantly need to transfuse the patient as the cells are dying, the RBCs are dying. And the comorbidities are also because of the pathophysiology. Persistent transfusion leads to iron overload in the marrow, in the liver, which can lead to marrow failure, which can lead to liver failure. There's extramedullary hematopoiesis, so there'll be bony changes in the skull, in the hands. You're going to get altered growth and development, and of course, endocrinopathies when there's a lot of iron deposition. So if I come to the pathogenesis, there is a deletion in chromosome 11. This you will be asked, and you should remember this. This is an important DM question. Similarly for alpha gene, I've shown you that also you have to remember. And once there's a deletion, the beta chain formation becomes defective. And once if there's no beta chain being formed, then what is in excess is the alpha chain. I have already taken the basic molecular architecture of adult hemoglobin, a fetal hemoglobin, what is hemoglobin delta. I've already discussed that, so I'm not going back into this because I want to keep this video short and crisp. If you want to, have a refresher's course, you can visit the video before this on hemolytic anemias, the alpha thalassemia one, and you're going to get your answers. So if there is a lot of alpha chain, because there is no beta chain to combine with it, when it combines with the gamma chain, it is forming alpha gamma alpha to gamma 2 configuration, which is that of hemoglobin F. So one thing that happens when there's no beta chain is formation of increased hemoglobin F. and A2 is alpha 2 delta 2, so there will be increased hemoglobin A2. What is not going to increase is the adult hemoglobin, that is alpha 2 beta 2, because there is no beta 2 bind with. Now what happens is red cells with free alpha chain, when there is a lot of free alpha chain which has not combined, then the spleen will read this as an error and these cells will have an extravascular hemolysis. That is, they are going to die in the reticuloendothelial system. And accumulation of a lot of free alpha chain also leads to ineffective erythropoiesis, because when the hemoglobin, adult hemoglobin, is not forming properly and all the delta and gamma has been saturated, then what is left? A simple plain alpha chain. So if there's ineffective erythropoiesis, there's a lot of hemolysis, it leads to anemia, which leads to tissue hypoxia, which leads to increased iron absorption from the gut, because the body thinks that there's a lot of anemia ho raha hai because the iron levels are low, and you get an iron overload. Also, to combat this persistent anemia, you're going to transfuse the patient repeatedly. That will enhance the iron overload that you're facing. Now, what happens is multiple transfusions will give a negative feedback on the EPO production, will increase hepcidin secretion, and this will lead to more storage of iron which has been absorbed rather than utilization of the iron, and hence hemosiderosis will occur. So, a lot of mechanisms are occurring which are leading to a complete failure once your beta chain has reduced. So what happens is, if you see the X-ray, you will see these kind of bony trabeculations and expansion of the metacarpals carpals as a lot of extramedullary hematopoiesis. Similarly, this hair-on end appearance is very characteristic of the skull of beta thalassemia, which is due to the extramedullary hematopoiesis and expansion of the bony table over here. What is important here is to know the difference between iron overload in thalassemia major and intermediate. Now, the storage sites in liver are, of course, the Kupffer cells, heart, cardiac, hemosiderosis. Now, cardiac problem is more common in thalassemia major as compared to minor. Fibrosis of the liver is more common in thalassemia intermediate. I know you must be thinking that if it is thalassemia major, then it should be more fibrosis, but no. There is definitely excessive deposition of iron, but fibrosis is a sign of chronicity. So, in an intermediate case, there's some deposition injury and a long chronic history, and still the patient is fine, maybe some hemosiderosis with fibrosis. In major, there's so much iron. There's so much iron each and every time, even if it is chronic, that you don't get that kind of time to, that fibrosis to happen, because fibrosis happens after injury. It is a sign of healing. That healing is not happening in major, which is happening in intermediate. Endocrinopathies, again, they are minimal in intermedia. Important to know, serum ferritin is very high in major, normal to slightly high in intermedia. Hepcidin is high. It is deficient in thalassemia intermedia. Now, this is something contra, because hepcidin causes iron storage. So definitely in major it is high, but somehow it is deficient in intermedia. And serum transferrin saturation is low in major and high in intermediate. Again, these 2 points are contradictory, and you should have memorize it. Of course, you can explain the serum transferrin saturation because transferrin carries the iron. So a lot of iron is being carried in major. In intermediate, not as that much as compared to the major. So STFR you can explain. Hepcidin also you can maybe explain, because intermedia is a milder form than a major thalassemia. So yes, lesser storage protein is present. That is why it is making it milder as compared to a major. So if you go for the types, as I had mentioned, are important, then there's major, intermediate and minor depending on the hemoglobin levels and the MCV. Now, what is important to know is that to differentiate between alpha thalassemia and beta thalassemia on smear is difficult. To differentiate between any hemolytic anemia until unless it is specific hemolysis, like G6PD deficiency or spherocytosis, leptocytosis, something like that, or HBC crystals, these are very specific diseases. But thalassemia as such, it becomes very, very difficult. You will get NRBCs, you might get a leukoerythroblastic picture, you will get schistocytes, you might get polychromatophils. So in general, it becomes tough for a pathologist to just see the PS and tell you. So there comes the importance of clinical history. Spherocytes might also be present in all sorts of hemolytic anemia, not only hereditary spherocytosis. So, these are pathological overlaps which you can only resolve when you know the clinical history. Like for thalassemias, you'll always have a history of multiple transfusions, positive family history. So you have to go and get these histories. Spherocytosis, you have to see the MCH and the MCV, compare that to the thalassemia. Fine. So these are some important pointers. Very, very important to notice that history of blood transfusion when the smear has been made should be ruled out. A smear which has been transfused will not have this kind of a poikilocytic picture. It will have spherocytes. So when you interpret that smear, you might miss or make a wrong diagnosis. So ask the clinician to repeat the peripheral smear after 48 hours or 3 days or a week, not a week, but 3 to 4 days after the patient has been transfused, because let that transfused cells die out, get consumed, get diluted with whatever the normal picture is. Similarly, you do not perform HPLCs on transfused blood. This also stands, although this is off topic, but this also stands true for PNH flare. You do not perform it on transfused blood because it dilutes the population that you have to see. Okay, again, marrow will show marked erythroid hyperplasia with reversal. It might show dyserythropoiesis, quite common. Multiple transfusion will show you increased iron. See this dark blue iron. This is grade 4, grade 5 iron, grade 4 iron, and this happens after multiple transfusions. Sometimes the side effect of this multiple transfusion and iron overload can be bone marrow failure. The marrow will stop responding. There can be arrest and the cell count might become low, and if you don't have a proper history you might confuse it with pancytopenia. You might start looking for leukemias, aplastic anemias in a simple case of thalassemia with iron overload. This Kluwer-Betke test shows you that when there is HbF present in excess in RBCs, it does not get hemolyzed compared to a normal RBC which is not resistant to acid hemolysis and gets hemolyzed. So this is Kluwer-Betke test. Okay, these are the different heterozygous forms of thalassemias which you interpret, which a good hematopathologist interprets. You see these cases, they are not just limited to the textbook. And this is marked pyropoikilocytosis, and this is the HPLC graph, which I will show you. I'll take a separate class for it where I'm going to discuss just the cases where the point is falling, where the peak is following, what the peak signifies. I'm going to deal with that in a separate lecture because it is an important topic. Coming to the minor, thalassemia minor is a chance diagnosis. You might miss it, you might have borderline anemia, and you might stay healthy until and unless why it is important is that if you have the disease and your husband has the disease or the wife has the disease and the child manifests as major, that is when this disease is caught. And if you already know that you are suffering from it or your spouse is suffering from it, antenatal testing of the fetus is very important through chorionic villus sampling in the 12th week, where they try to genetically determine whether there will be it most probably is what a presence of thalassemia in the baby or not. This is a hemolytic test, tube test for visual testing for thalassemia minor. Nestroff is the name of this test. It is naked eye single tube osmotic fragility testing. Thalassemia cases, they have a very low osmotic fragility. They hemolyze quickly. So what we when we take blood and we mix it with the reagent in a control tube, which should not, the blood should not get hemolyzed. You can see this black line clearly. When hemolysis occurs in the test tube, you see the blooding. These images are taken from Tejinder Singh Sir's book, so you can go through it and read it and remember the test. Of course, these are various different forms of heterozygous hemoglobins with beta thalassemia. One very important point I want to tell you about HPFH is that persistent fetal hemoglobin, this gives a very early peak in the HPLC graph. It is very fast moving, and this is missed at times by inexperienced pathologists. So this is very fast moving hemoglobin, giving a very early fast peak. I'll discuss that when we, read HPLC. So that is the importance of this hemoglobin, and I'll tell you what is the importance of others in that HPLC lecture. Treatment has a lot of new modalities where gene therapy is being targeted now. Before the baby is born in the world, we try to, target the gene and fix it. And of course, now thalassemia has come into the realm of donor transplant treatment. So, this is a very good ASH paper which you should go through, because as pathologists, you should know what is new in the treatment of thalassemia rather than the supportive treatment that we give. So my images are from Tejinder Singh Sir's book and Google Images, and I hope this is of some help. I assure you that I'm going to take a HPLC lecture before I end the hemolytic anemias, and I hope you will benefit from this. And if you have any questions, please feel free to message me and discuss. Thank you.